What's up, No Nation? Thank you for tuning in to another episode. It is mid-season review time. We are halfway through the season. Unfortunately, it's not going the way we want, so this is going to be pretty bad. Michael, you remember back in the day when you had to bring your report card home to your mom or your dad and show it to them? Well, I'm pretty sure Mike Norvell's a little bit nervous to bring this report card home right now because his Nintendo's getting taken away. He's getting grounded. He's probably getting that butt tore up because it is not going to be the report card that you want to bring home. But we're going to talk about where Florida State stands halfway through the season as we go into a bye week. So there is no game to talk about. We thought this would be a good time to do some big picture talk, where Florida State's at, what the rest of the season can be for this team, some of the things that have buoyed your hope a little bit with the quarterback change and young players and stuff like that. We're going to get into a kind of a mid-season review on this episode. Obviously, before we jump into this, I do want to say that obviously our thoughts and prayers are with everybody in the path of this hurricane that is headed towards Florida. Feels like we're saying this a little bit too often. We just talked about this with the other one. Obviously, Michael is in Central Florida, so hopefully he doesn't blow away mid-episode. If he does, we'll just keep rolling and make it happen. Just give us your thoughts on the way out the roof. So hopefully that works. But again, guys, if you are in the path of this thing, please be smart, please be safe, and take care of each other. So with that being said, Michael, let's jump in this thing. How are you, my friend?
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks for having me, Jesse. Yeah, just real quick. Yeah, if you're in the Tampa, Sarasota area, please, I hope you've gotten out already, gotten to higher ground. This is not a joke. This is Category 4. And so, make sure you stay safe. For those of you Noel fans around who are part of Plant the Spear family, if you're into prayer and stuff like that, we'd appreciate your prayers down here. And we'd also appreciate your prayers for our football team because Mike's about to get a butt whooping. I don't know, Jesse, if you remember back in the day in report cards, when you get your report cards and you got a bad grade, you try to see if you could scan it so you could put the letter over the bad letter.
Yeah.
I think Mike has been doing a lot of that with his post-practice reports. But yeah, I mean, it's just been what a season. We were talking offline about how, our preseason projections and what we were thinking the floor of this team was. No one, not even the greatest of the prognosticators out there in college football, could have foreseen what Florida State is going through. I mean, even the great GOAT Nick Saban said that this was a NFL, bigger body, stronger player, faster team kind of team. And for him to have been wrong, I mean, it's just wild. And this is where we are right now.
Yeah, I mean, he was wrong. NFL scouts were wrong. Everybody who voted for Florida State to win the ACC at ACC Media Days was wrong. Everyone who covers this team is wrong. So it's been wild, man. I mean, Florida State starts 1-5 for the first time since 1975, 49 years. It's been since Florida State has been this bad. And so it's tough, man. And I really think, we were talking about this before the show that pretty much any hopes of a bowl are out the window at this point. I mean, you would have to win out first off, or you'd have to only lose one more game, which would involve upsetting Miami or Notre Dame. But while that's unlikely, I do think there are some positives when you look back to how 2021 played out. I do think there are some ways that you can gain momentum going into next year. Now, of course, obviously the offseason is going to present a whole new level of challenges where you're going to have to look at personnel changes and coaching staff changes and all these types of things that you're going to have to adjust to really get this thing back on track. But I do think there are some things towards the end of the season. There are some things that you're seeing now that while the results may not be following yet, I do think that you have some things that can give you a little bit of hope and excitement. Again, man, I know it's hard to say this because a lot of people don't like it. Like I said in the postgame show, a lot of people weren't necessarily happy with me saying this. But you are a little bit happy with some of the things you saw against Clemson. But nobody's happy to be 1-5. Don't make no mistake. I'm not saying that we're happy to be 1-5. Nobody wants to be here. Nobody's happy after a loss. But I do think you'll see some things that will continue to translate throughout the season. And so that's kind of where we're going to talk about first. But before we do that, we're going to get into kind of where Florida State is at and then where they're going. Now, one of the things that I do want to touch on real quick is that, we did talk about a couple, I think it was like a week or two ago, where Mike Norvell changed his tone in the press conference and he started calling people out. And really challenged this team. And that was after the SMU game. And they played better against Clemson. They still lost the game, but they played a little bit better. And I think you're seeing that trend continue this week. The coaches were pretty blunt this week about some of the things that they were saying. And so, I mean, it's time to really challenge this team. It's time to really shake things up. And it's time to really do whatever is necessary to get this better, whether that be personnel switching, whether that
Right.
be, benching some of the older guys, going with some of the
Right.
younger guys, because we have seen the young guys make an impact. Because you got to do something, man. I mean,
That's
you're
right.
losing enthusiasm, you're losing the fan base, and really, one thing for me, Michael, is even during the lost decade, even during some of the Willie teams, like the one thing that stands out about this team more than anything is that this team is just not fun to watch.
Right.
I mean, there's no big hits. There are no big, really no explosive plays, at least not that many.
Right.
But man, it's just like it's just not really fun. It's not a fun brand of football to watch. It's not even the most likable team. And
Yeah.
so you just need to, man, you got to shake things up. You got to fix some things. And so I do think you're seeing the coaches take that kind of different approach now to be like, look, we got to figure something out. And if the older guys aren't getting it done, it's time to put them on the bench because we have to do
Yeah.
something. And, and I'll kick it back to you on this, but when we talk about that, when we talk about them making these changes and we talk about them challenging this team and we talk about probably not making a bowl, a lot of that does go back to where the bowl was going to be kind of your rookie camp for next year.
That's right.
And so if you don't make that, then you need to use the remainder of this season as your rookie camp for next year because you're not going to get those extra practices now. And
That's
so
right.
you need to use that to develop these young guys. So I think if these older guys aren't getting done, you have to make the switch because this is what's giving you hope for next year with guys like Brock Glenn, with guys like Amari Williams, guys like Landon Thomas. So it's time to either challenge these old guys to get the job done right now, or it's time to move on and find the guys that are going to help you fix this thing next year.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love what you just said there about this idea of the rookie camp being in season because the likelihood of you winning, 6 games this season feels very slim. So this is your off-season training right now. Like off-season training began against Clemson. And now you go into the bye week. And now you have the rest of the games to really start off-season training your guys. Then you're going to go into another off-season training. So you're going to double up there. And then you got your preseason camp again. And you should be spending every waking moment trying to figure out, how do I get the players on this roster that are going to be back next year better, right? And this doesn't mean that you have to completely go 100% youth movement. Everybody that's not coming back next year can't play. There's some guys that are graduating or they've run out of eligibility that are playing their butts off. Malik Benson is one of them. Some of the guys on
Josh
the defense, Josh Farmer, so you want to keep playing those guys. But if they're upperclassmen and they're running out of eligibility, they're not going to be back tomorrow. They're not going to be back.
Hopefully, some of them aren't back tomorrow, but
that'd be nice, right? But if they're going to be back next year and they're just loafing, they're just collecting a check. Let them go collect the check on the bench, right?
Yeah,
because we're trying to build for the future, and so replacing those older guys, getting those younger guys in, seeing what they're able to do. And I agree with you, Jesse. This team's not fun to watch. Man, one of the things that you love about Florida State, one of the things we grew up loving is that this team was always fun. Big hits, big plays, big personalities, alpha dogs. I mean, even last year's team, you had Jared Verse. You had Pat Payton last year was kind of a big, deal. You had Keon Coleman, you had Johnny, you had those guys. You're like, man, every time they got on the field, you had Jordan Travis. Like they brought energy, they brought passion. Yeah. And this team has lacked a lot of passion. I mean, you could tell it's not been fun for anybody in that program, right? For the coaching staff, for the players. I mean, dude, even the assistants who give the water, they're like, here's some water. Like they're not even excited, right? You know what I'm saying? And yes, you saw a little bit of the energy come with Clemson. I mean, it's a rivalry game. And then, just a side note here, shout out to the fans that showed up to Clemson, because it could have been very easy for the fans to be like, you know what, we're done. We're going to get whooped. We're going to get spanked. We're not going to that game. We're not spending our money. But that stadium was loud. That stadium was for whatever the capacity it was at with the construction going on. They were rocking. But at the end of the day, Jesse, we talk about, the coaching staff has changed its tone of they're calling out players. That's great. I'm glad. those players, it sucks to always have to take the responsibility as coaches and letting the fans and the media know that, hey, they're players that are not performing like we taught them to. But at the end of the day, this travesty, this hot garbage of a team falls on you, coaches.
Yeah.
This is your problem, and you've got to figure out how to fix it.
Yeah, I think a lot of the fans showed up for Brock because at least
Yeah,
you saw some excitement there. And, again, the onus really a lot of times always falls on quarterback. And DJ was not being very effective at the position.
that's
But you
right.
still see, like, we're not helping out the quarterbacks at all. You still had the same warts that plagued DJU: drop passes, poor run blocking, no run game, poor pass blocking. A lot of that stuff showed up again with Brock Glenn at quarterback. So those are things that you have to fix. And I mean, again, like you hear them now, like Mike Norvell called the run game embarrassing. And I
Yes,
mean,
he did.
it is. So like he knows that it has to get better. And I mean, Alex Atkins even said, like, we got to go back and we got to see where these guys, you got to challenge these guys to get better, show them the film. And if they can't, you got to find somebody else. And I think
Right.
that's why you're seeing guys like Jalen Early and Andre Otto
Yeah.
getting their opportunity, because again, like it's just like the argument that we had with DJU and Brock Glenn, where it's like, I don't know that anybody expected Brock Glenn to look that good. Now, granted, he wasn't perfect. There's some things that got to get better, but a lot of the mistakes were on the receivers, and we're going to talk about that in the offensive section here in just a second. But again, it's a hope for the future with Brock Glenn. Like, DJ's
Right.
not going to be here now. I know there's been some talk about him getting a medical red shirt. Hopefully
here.
Hopefully it ain't in Tallahassee. Like, you can go medically do whatever you want somewhere else, but it don't need to be here. But again, that's a guy that can help you rebuild next year. And so I think
Right.
now you need to start working some of those guys in. But yeah, man, I think that the young guys performing well is what makes you feel good about this thing possibly getting righted sooner than later.
Right.
Now, like we've talked about before, and we don't want to beat a dead horse in this episode because we've talked about a lot of this stuff in the past, but you're going to have to recruit better.
Yes.
You're going to still need to go out to the portal and get some help. And we'll talk about that later in the show when we look at what to do for next year. You're still going to need some help. But the fact that you got most of your good players right now are freshmen and sophomores that are getting an opportunity because the season has went the way it has, that does kind of give you a little bit of light in the darkness, right? That things can get better when these guys get some more experience and continue to grow. But I mean, at the same time, the veteran presence on this team has really just been a major letdown. And so I think now it's time to really challenge those guys that look at you either put up or shut up, or you're going to be on the bench. It is what it is.
Well, I mean, and it's just kind of like what we were talking about offline. Like, I mean, we were reminiscent about that 2013 team. You were talking about the documentary you watch. And when you saw those upperclassmen, you saw those guys, man, they were dogs. I mean, they were like, you weren't going to slouch through practice. You weren't going to show up to the game and half play or loaf around. They were going to be in your face if you didn't do that. And we just have not seen that with this team. I mean, last year's team was very much like that. You weren't slouching around Jared Verse. He'd be all up in your face ready to fight you, right?
Yeah.
Trey Benson, even though he's quiet, he was an alpha dog. Keon Coleman was the alpha dog, right? They weren't going to let you just show up and do that. And it seems like, and again, we don't have access, we don't have credentials, we don't get to cover this program as much as we would love to. But it just seems like from what we've read, what we've understood, what we see in the games, man, there is no true leadership from this upperclassman. This has been a failed experiment of a team on all levels, but especially in that upperclassman area.
Yeah, because most of your actual leaders are the young guys. And I think that's one area where you saw Brock Glenn actually kind of do some things that really got this team to play a little bit better than they had in the past. So with that being said, we'll start with offense. But before we get into that, let me bring you a quick word from today's sponsor. And Michael, you can turn the bye week into a bye week by buying you some new gear. I've been thinking about that one. I've been cooking that one for a little bit. You can buy some new gear from Alumni Hall FSU, because no matter how terrible the team might look, you can look great at the game by getting some awesome FSU gear from Alumni Hall FSU. 1415 Timberlane Road in Tallahassee. We got a couple of road games coming up, so you might need to shop online, have it shipped to your door, which you can do as well. Go to alumnihall.com, navigate over to the FSU page, and pick out your selections there. You can use code SPEAR to save 10%, to save some money on this gear while you get it. So, I know it's crazy to say, Michael, but Christmas is coming. So,
Christmas is
maybe
coming.
maybe you can wish for a couple of wins and maybe knock some gifts off the list at the same time. So go check those guys out. We appreciate y'all for supporting those that support us. So let's talk about this offense, man. I mean, honestly, we joked about report cards beforehand. Look, did you have D's in high school? Because we went from C's to F's where I grew up. We didn't get D's. So there was either like you pass, or it was like, no, you ain't cutting the mustard here. This offense is all F's. There are no D's. This is a F minus, triple minus. This is terrible. This is like, man, you're in detention. These grades are so bad. This offense has been pitiful. You are 128th in scoring offense at 14.8 points per game. You are 83rd in passing offense at 216 yards per game. You are 133rd of 134 teams in rushing at 58 yards per game. And, when I was pulling some stats for this, I'm like, man, we're just not good at anything, especially on offense. Tackles for loss allowed, 119th. Sacks allowed, tied for 103rd. Your explosive plays tied for 91st with 20, and 4 of those came against Clemson. Your red zone scoring, you are tied for 79th. Your touchdown percentage, you are 86. So, man, it's just not been good at all on this offense. And this is not something that we thought we would see, because we had heard that this was going to be the best, deepest offensive line. We had heard they had explosive speed all over the field at wide receiver. And there's a lot of bad with this offense. I mean, just across the board. But I will say, this is almost a conversation that I didn't even want to have until last week when we saw Brock Glenn, because I know there's going to be some people that are like, well, we still only scored 13 points. And I understand that. But to me, the difference here when you look at the offense now is that obviously we know quarterback is the most important position on the field.
Right.
And you seem to have found a fix there. Now, obviously it was one game, but it was against a pretty good defense. You want to see Brock Glenn perform well in more than one game before you're just like, Brock Glenn is the savior of this offense.
Right.
But I do think it at least gives you hope that some things can get better. And the reason I say that is, for one, the difference to me with Brock Glenn was like, the plays were there with DJU and Brock Glenn in a lot of the cases. But the difference was Brock Glenn made the throws and the receivers just dropped them, right? You can maybe, hopefully, I mean, goodness gracious, some of these guys are like 4th and 5th year seniors. I don't know how much more you can coach them up. But maybe you can coach up some guys to catch some passes. Maybe you can put in the young guys. Like, you fixed the problem at tight end by bringing in different bodies. The difference was with DJU, the receivers were wide open and you just missed them. So, like, at least the passes now are being made, and you have a higher percentage probably of like a receiver actually catching the ball when it hits them in their hand eventually than a quarterback just missing wide open throws. So
that's right.
You hope that he can get this offense rolling a little bit. You hope that with his mobile ability, which they really didn't use against Clemson, he moved the pocket a little bit. He extended some plays, but he really wasn't a factor in the run game. Only 25 sack adjusted rush yards there. Clemson was a very good front seven. Like, their defense may not be elite this year. That's probably going to be one of the best front sevens you're going to face all season. And so you're hoping that Brock Glenn can continue to play well. You get him a bye week this week. You get to working back on your fundamentals with some of your offensive guys. Then you go into a game against Duke that hopefully you can win and get some confidence there. So you hope that maybe he can give this offense a spark that continues to develop over the course of the season. Because, I mean, if you look and Darian Williamson doesn't drop that walk-in touchdown, towards the end of the game, man, I know, like, you weren't going to kick a field goal on the last drive because it wasn't going to help you win the game because you were down too much. But if Amari Williams doesn't fall down on a wide open pass, that puts you at a minimum in field goal range. So maybe you don't score a touchdown there, but right there, you're looking at 23 points. That's the most you've scored all season. So, like,
that's right.
You can see some things there. And I do think Brock Glenn being able to make the plays that he's made, if you can get him involved in the run game, and, we were talking about this a little bit too. I mean, keep in mind, I think Clemson was kind of like, well, we're going to make this redshirt freshman throw the ball to beat us. And I don't think they expected him to throw the ball that well, to be honest. They weren't really loading the box a whole lot. because they know we run so bad. But keep in mind, like even last year, we only ran for 22 yards against Clemson last year, same number as this year. So like we don't have necessarily a great history of running against Clemson anyway. But one thing that I do want to point out, and I'll kick back to you for some thoughts on this offense here, but I think with what Brock brings, where you do have to respect his pass game now, because we were talking about this, like, man, the one thing we talked about when Brock came in was the mobility and the moxie. Like that dude will stand in there and sling that thing. Like we were talking about it before the show, we were almost joking, like we kept screaming at DJ to air the freaking ball out. With Brock, it's like, dude, you don't have to air it out every play, man. Like you can take some mustard off of that thing. But I do think with his ability to throw it, you'll see teams respect the pass more than they did with DJ. I think with his mobile ability, you'll see them work that into the game plan a little bit more. And when you look, I was doing some research before the show. In your first 6 games, now we probably helped them a lot get this ranking because we can't run the ball. So we bumped their stats up. You faced 5 rushing defenses in the top 50. The last 6 games, you only have 2 rushing defenses in the top 50, and that one of those is Notre Dame at 49th. So you will have some opportunity to kind of get this run game right. Now, it could be fool's gold because you're going to be able to run the ball against worse running defenses, but nonetheless, you need to be able to run the ball. And so, like, if you can take advantage of some, like Florida is the 101st, I think, ranked rushing defense. If you can run the ball, and I'm not expecting you to run the ball for 200 yards,
right?
But if you can get to triple digits, that's going to help your offense a lot. And I think just seeing Brock, what he brings to the position at quarterback, I think it has to give you a lot of hope that this offense can figure some things out over the rest of the season, because that was only start 1 against a really good defense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, here's the thing, man. This offense has just been a travesty from day one. I mean, the Georgia Tech game. I mean, outside of that opening drive where you saw how they just punished and you thought, okay, we got something, we cooking, to the rest of the game and then beyond it's just been a mystery of how bad this offense have been. I mean, like you said, they average 14.8 points a game. They're 128th in the country. When have you ever heard of Florida State being 128th in the country in scoring offense? Like, that's ridiculous. So I'm going to work myself backwards here. I'm going to start at the tight end position. It's hard for me to give the overall offense. I'm just going to give a straight F. We've already said that. But to go through those positions, it's hard for me to give everybody in the tight end position an F, because you look at Landon Thomas, you look at Amari Williams. While, yes, they've had some drops or whatever, but they've been better. They've been better. They've been, a little bit better blocking. They've been a little bit better catching, a little bit better running routes. So to them, I'm giving them a C-. Kyle Morlock, he's got a straight F.
Yeah.
That boy be back mopping the bathrooms right now. Okay.
You're
Love you,
out of
Cal.
class.
Mean it. You're done. You're done, man. I don't want to pour onto the guy. I give the wide receivers a D. I think there have been some moments where they've had opportunities to make big plays and they've missed it. There have been moments where the quarterback, and I'll get to that in a second, did not put the ball where it needs to be. And so it's hard for them. But then there have been some key drops over and over and over. Like you said, there's 23 points that we basically miss out on with the drops in those games against Clemson. And so the wide receivers have been really unimpressive to me. And again, this was the area. Just remember, this was the area that we said, that every media outlet, even Mike Norvell, said going into the season that had the most question mark. Now, who would know that while the wide receivers had the most question mark, we thought we had an all-American type offensive line, and they're not all-American. They're American cheese offensive line. Okay. They are straight bad. Just terrible. I give him an F+, if that's even possible. No one. I mean, even Richie Leonard, who is out for the season, hope you get better, bro. He's been okay, but even him, he hasn't been anything to sing home about. I mean, you have a 5th-year senior, Maurice Smith, who is snapping the ball over people's head. How are we doing that when you've been 5 years in college? I don't understand. We have a left tackle who Mike Norvell called the all-American candidate, who's getting beat off the line, getting blown up. I mean, it's just ridiculous. Offensive linemen that can't move their feet. They can't set the edge. They're not playing well. They're not cohesive. I mean, it is terrible. And this grade leads really to my running back grade, because it's really hard to really judge the running back
Yeah.
backfield. I mean, yes, we saw what Rodell Williams, we know he's pretty much probably out for most of the season there. But even what we saw of him, even with the terrible offensive line, you could see some tangibles of like, okay, he's not as fast, he's not as like powerful as we thought he was going to be. Lawrence Toafili, obviously he's the steady back, the steady Eddie, but behind that line, he really can't really get anything going. Cam Davis, who's going to be a great, great running back there in the future, seems to get hit. Once he gets hit, he's pretty much down. He's not getting a lot of yards after contact. And then we haven't seen much of Micaiah Danzy or Keziah Holmes. We have, man, since the first game, he's pretty much MIA.
Since he dropped that screen pass against Memphis, like, I don't know that he's played again.
I don't even know if he's on the roster still. Yeah. Like, it's been bad. So I give them a D, but that D is really more so because this offensive line is absolutely atrocious.
Yeah.
And then we get to the quarterback, the trigger man of the offense. DJU gets a straight F. We're done. Have a great career. If you go get a 6-year, that probably should be at, East Coast Carolina, Mississippi State School. And then with Brock, I'm going to give Brock a C because what I saw of him in that Clemson game, listen, we're not moral victories here, but I saw a little bit of hope. I saw a gunslinger. I saw somebody willing to do the things necessary to try to win the game. I wish Mike would have released his legs a little bit more against Clemson. I think that could have helped a little bit. And you're right, man, that boy loves to air the ball out. There's one part, we talked about this in the offline, where he rolls out and there's a guy wide open 5 yards down the field. There's no one around him, probably about 10 to 15 yards. It's going to be a big game. And Brock just throws that ball 40 yards down the field and misses the thing. And you're like, bro, you got to take the check down. It's right there. But that's going to come with a young player like that. So I give him a C until I see more.
Yeah. I think one thing too is like you have a lot of these, if you grade individual position groups, it's kind of like when you do a group project in school where like maybe half the group did their job and half the group didn't, and it caused you to fail. Like, I don't think these running backs are bad. Right. I just think they're running behind a terrible offensive line. I saw something on social media the other day that said like Florida State's run game is not just bad, it's historically bad. Like this is one of the worst rushing offenses in the last 10 years almost. I think it was 8 years from 2016. So it is historically bad. Now, granted, I mean, Dalvin Cook ran behind some bad offensive lines and made some things work. But at the same time, none of these guys are Dalvin Cook. But, it's not illegal to make a guy miss. So I don't think the running backs are bad. I just don't think they're special. And I think that's a problem. And again, Cam Davis is a freshman. I think it is encouraging to see some of the hard runs that he does. But again, like, he's not making people miss. Lawrence Toafili doesn't really look like the guy that you know of the past. But this offensive line is so bad that it's hard to really tell. I think Brock Glenn, I would almost give him a B- if you go with the group project mentality again, because if you look at what the passes that they dropped, the opportunities that were missed. And I actually went back after that Clemson game, and I talked about this in a post game a little bit, where I said I thought they had this many or that many. I went back and I watched all of his throws, and I counted. You had 5 drops, and I don't count the PBU where Portier got the ball broken up down the sideline. Like, that's just a good play by the DB. But if the ball hits you in the hands or the chest plate, and you have no one around you, you should catch that ball. And so I counted 5 drops. PFF credited us with 4. You had 1 big pass play called back on a penalty, and 1 where the tight end fell down on a wide open route. Even even his interception in that game was on a receiver breaking the wrong way. So
that's right.
I went back and calculated. And now, granted, I understand teams aren't going to have 100% catch rate. Teams aren't going to drop 0 passes. It happens. It's football. But just by what I went back in that game, with those 7 plays, with not a single yak yard added, because again, you don't know what these could have turned into. I mean, these plays could have turned into something big. The drive could have been sustained into points. You left in 7 plays. You left 170 yards and roughly what could have been at a minimum of 10 points on the field there. And again, like I said, I know it's kind of adjusting here, but Brock's numbers would have been, if you add those with no yak yards, again, like say you take away one of the drops or 2 that they just happened, but you also add in yak yards. I mean, he would have been 30 or 41 for 398 yards and about 3 touchdowns. That would have been an amazing game against Clemson. So, like,
yeah,
I will say that you have to catch the ball. And I do think it's funny, like, how bad are these receivers? Man, Josh Pate, most of you guys know, he's, I think, 247's national guy, said that, like, I believe he said they're the worst receiving group in the country, that they actively fight the ball when it's in the air instead of trying to catch it. I mean, these receivers are a national embarrassment. And to put that into perspective, Florida State has the lowest catch rate in the ACC. This takes a lot of math, so I only stuck with the conference here. But they have the lowest catch rate in the ACC at 60.6%. They also have the most drops in the ACC with 18, and I would suspect that's got to be up there with the most in the country. They lead the ACC by a minimum of 5 drops. The next closest team is NC State, who is also terrible, with 13. A lot of teams, I mean, you look at a team like Pitt has only dropped 3 passes all season, and we've dropped 18 passes. That is just unbelievably bad. And, you
that's
look at
terrible.
So, like, that's just the teams around you that you're competing with. But you look at where you want to be, right?
Yeah.
Florida State had PFF credited with 4 drops. So I'm going to go with that number because I can't go count the other ones. But I saw at least 5. So you look at 4 of the current top 5 AP ranked teams played on Saturday. Combined, those teams had 4 drops.
Yeah.
You had 4 drops by yourself. So you see the teams that are where you want to be, and you see where you're at. Every one of those teams outside of Oregon had a 70+% catch rate. Georgia had a 79% catch rate. Ohio State was at 84%. You were at 65.7. So again, like, you see where you got to be, and you see what you're not doing. So to me, this is why, like, when I look at this offense, the receivers to me right now are. It's almost like you got to grade them in 2 different groups, right? You grade where they're at. I mean, I think Hakeem has had a pretty decent game against Clemson.
Yeah.
I think Ja'Kai had a drop, but he's still been a pretty good receiver for you. I do think Malik Benson is playing hard. I don't think he deserves to be benched, but I don't need to see Darian Williamson anymore. I don't need to see Kentron Portier anymore, if we're being honest. Like, let me see what Wayne McCoy, let me see what Elijah Moore has, because when you look at the boost that the young tight ends have given you, I think the receivers can't be much worse than that. So give them the opportunity and let us at least see what it looks like. But, again, I look at Brock, and I want to touch on this, and we'll move on from the quarterback. But his QBR in this game against Clemson was 78.7. DJ's QBRs this season per game have been 71.7 against Georgia Tech, then 25.8, 22.1, 49.5, and 12.7 against SMU. That is an unreal difference. So again, and that's considering Brock is at 78.7 with all those drops and all those play getting called back and whatnot. His PFF grade was 83.5, highest graded on the team, on the offense. I mean, from last week. In 2023, when we went 13-1, Jordan Travis only had 1 game that graded higher than 83.5. So you have something in Brock Glenn. You just need the guys around him to actually start stepping up and helping him. Because, man, again, like, you see what these young tight ends are doing. Landon Thomas was PFF's highest graded true freshman tight end in week 6 with a 75.0 grade. And I believe he had a drop too, which does really negatively impact your grade. But on the season, he has 8 receptions for 100 yards and a touchdown already. And so he's really only saw significant playing time in 2 games. I think Kyle Morlock has 107 yards. So, like, man, you're seeing some stuff out of the young guys that I'd like to see what you got in the young receivers too. But then to touch on the offensive line real quick, just to round up my thoughts on the offense. I mean, this offensive line, I give it an F-. I mean, it is absolutely atrocious. Just when you look at all things, according to PFF, in pass block efficiency, they are 58th of 69 Power 4 teams. Obviously, you have the second to last rushing offense in the country, the worst in the Power 4. But I do think some of the things you look at here, like, again, with the young guys, man, I think Jalen Early is a guy that is looking pretty decent. Now, he did get bull rushed in this game against Clemson, kind of got ragdolled one time.
Yeah,
Andre Otto didn't have the greatest game, but it was his very first start as a redshirt freshman. Yep. And against a very good front seven. And I did think it was funny in the post-practice thing where they were talking about, like, getting run over or push back or beat on a block. Is that like a strength and conditioning thing? Is that a technique thing? And he said, well, sometimes it's a little bit of both, but mostly it's a technique thing. He said, but honestly, and not to mince words, he said sometimes you just get your ass ran over. So it was kind of funny because that's really what happened with Andre Otto. That's what got he got bull rushed by the Clemson guy and had a hold of his jersey when he was falling down, and that's what got that play called back. So, but you see your young guys, they're better or no worse than your oldest guys. And so I'm ready to see some guys like Lucas Simmons, because I mean, you're getting nothing out of Jeremiah Byers. I know he may or may not be healthy, but I think it might be time to see some guys and to look at this man in the run blocking grades per PFF. And there's a lot of, this is every individual lineman in the Power Four. I went and pulled these numbers last night. Run blocking grades. Jalen Early has a run blocking grade of 82.3, which is 8th of all Power Four linemen. That's pretty darn good. Your next is Robert Scott at 213th. Richie Leonard, who's not even playing for you anymore, is 296. Darius Washington is 342nd. Maury Smith is 354th. Keandre Jones is 418th. Jeremiah Byers is 528th.
Jeez.
TJ Ferguson is literally dead last in the Power Four. He is the worst graded run blocker in the entire Power Four at 536. So, I mean, again, like, look at your starters. 300. I mean, your starters here are 342nd, 354th, 418th, 528th, 536. That's terrible. So, like, I'm ready to see what some of these younger guys can do. I think it's time to start developing these guys. This offensive line has been an abject failure. Now, I do think when you look at some of the things here, when you go to the larger picture before we switch over to defense, is like, what do you do with Alex Atkins? And this is what we were talking about before the show. Like, you have Solomon Thomas and you have Peyton Joseph committed to this class. This is what you need to help fix this offense. And I think that's why you want to see these young guys, because we've talked about this on prior shows where the recruiting has been okay. He's been one of your best recruiters, probably your best offensive recruiter that you got. But the development has sucked, and there's really no other way to say it. None of his high school recruits have panned out. Now, Jalen Early could turn out to be something. Andre Otto might turn out to be something. I think Lucas Simmons is going to be good. I think it's probably time to just give up on Armella. I just don't think that project's going to work out. But I do think it's a tough conversation, man, because, like, the only way to fix this is to recruit dudes on the offensive line, and you got 2 of them committed. But do you let him hold that spot and ruin another 2 recruits? Because
that's right.
His development just hasn't been there, and it's hard to argue that with anything different. So it's like, if you change position coaches, you're probably going to lose those recruits. It's potentially, we don't know that, but you're potentially going to lose those recruits. And so it's a rock and a hard place, man. Like, if you lose those recruits, it's not going to help you get any better. But if you bring them in and they don't translate, it's not going to help you get any better. I don't think he should be your offensive coordinator next year at a minimum. But, man, I still think you got to move on at this position. But, man, I mean, again, like, those are the pieces that you need to acquire to help this offensive line get better. Because while you found a answer at quarterback, the receivers are still terrible. And I think it's time to move on from Dugans too. But I still think this offensive line has been the number one problem for this offense this season.
Yeah, listen, as anybody who understands football knows, especially football in the South, even though Florida State's not in the SEC, they're in the South. And to play football in the South, you have to have the 2 most important things. And maybe the 3. I'd put 3. The 3 most important things is you have to have a good quarterback. You have to have a dominant offensive line, and you have to have a dominant defensive line. Everything else can figure itself out, right?
Yeah.
But if you do not have a dominant offensive line, it doesn't matter how great your quarterback is. They're going to be running for their life. I mean, look at Florida State circa 2016 with DeAndre running for his life all the time, right? Look at Jameis 2014 when that offensive line really started to downgrade. I mean, he's running for his life. Davin Cook played behind some really bad offensive linemen, but he was an otherworld star that could make people miss. Like you said, it isn't illegal to make people miss. And so when you look at that offensive line, the trajectory had been, 2020, 2021, 2022, you saw they were getting better. They were terrible at the quarterback position, yes. And I'm talking about Jordan too. He wasn't as great as he became. over time until like that 2022 season. But they could run. They could run against anybody. They were running
Yeah.
all up on Clemson. When we had the worst offense, not this bad, but we had a bad offense and they were still running on people. And it seemed like starting that 2023 season where we went 13-1, that offensive line took a massive regression. Now it was masked by Jordan's brilliant play. It was masked by the skill sets we had. We had Trey Benson, Joel Philly, we had Keon Coleman, Johnny, all those guys. So it was masked. But now without that NFL masking, you are seeing how terrible this offensive line is. Yes, those recruits you do have coming in. You don't want to lose them. But at the same time, you're talking about, Jesse, this is the way I think you have to look at it. You're talking about short-term pain versus long-term gain.
Yeah.
Short-term pain is you're going to lose those recruits if you fire Alex. I mean, I would imagine.
And you may not. You may not.
You may not. But the likelihood goes up if you fire Alex.
Yeah.
But if you keep Alex, then you're looking at short-term gain versus long-term pain because it's been proven. We have data points now that there's regression, massive regression happening on this offensive line. And so you have to think, do you want long-term gain and are you willing to sustain short-term pain when it comes to Alex Atkins?
Yeah, because I mean, when you look at the history of the guys that he's brought in, they just haven't produced and they've regressed and it's gotten worse and worse. And like you said, I mean, in 2022, you saw the signs or they ran good. 2023, the signs started to show up and then it's regressed. And like, again, this is year 5. You should have that big class that you signed in 2022 should be playing right now. And Jalen Early is really the only one who's playing out of that class. And so, yeah, I think you have to just suffer through the short-term pain to get to the long-term gain. And it depends on who you hire. Like, I think obviously with the early signing period, you may have to look towards the end of the season, making changes before like the Florida game or something like that, maybe after the Notre Dame game or something. So you can at least be like, hey, look, this is who your coach is going to be. So maybe you can hang on to them because you need those types of guys. But yeah, I mean, you may have to just deal with that, but it's definitely, like I said, man, it's been so bad up front that I think this is what really kills your offense this year. And I think, when you make a good point when you talk about the offense, it's like you need a good quarterback. I think you need either or, right? I don't even think you have to have great quarterback play because, again, you look at Alabama winning national championships with Mac Jones, Georgia winning 2 of them with a former walk-on. Like, they were dominant in the trenches.
That's right.
Whereas Florida State covered up bad offensive line play with NFL skill receivers or skill players. But this year, you just don't really have either or. And that's why it's been just such a train wreck. And I do think Brock Glenn will help cover some of this up going forward because he is actually able to evade pressure and move out of the pocket. But, man, you got to fix this offensive line first and foremost if you even want to have any success next year. And I think you need to start finding out what you got in these young guys because they are your future. A lot of these guys like Darius and Maurice and Byers, they're not going to be back next year. Robert Scott's not going to be back next year. So you need to start figuring out who you got, who you can roll with that's going to get you better next year. Because again, look at Jalen Early. That's a guy that you can build around. So you need to figure this out. But yeah, I still think you got to make a change there. I think you got to make a change at a lot of the offensive staff. But I do think you are at least you feel more than the defense on the offensive side of things. You are, because it's been so bad, you are seeing some of these guys, these young guys that are stepping up.
That's right.
And so I do think that's what makes you have a little bit of hope that things can get better maybe sooner than later, because you can build off an Amari Williams. You can build off of Landon Thomas. You can build off of a Brock Glenn and a Luke Kromenhawk. You can build off of a Cam Davis and a Mekhi Danzy. Man, that guy's got elite speed. We finally get to see him in a game. Of course, you got to catch the ball.
Yeah.
But, you see things that are like, okay, Hakeem Williams is starting to come on now. So I think you feel better about that than maybe the defensive side of the ball. But now we'll switch over to that side and look at there too.
Well, let me say real quick to that your last point about the coaches. Yeah, I think if you're looking at this offensive coaching staff, the only person that I think is a for sure fire, like if I could play Mike Norvell right now, I think the only person that is a surefire safe person on that offensive staff is very likely David Johnson with the running backs, because he's proven over and over that he can get the most out of those running backs when he has a decent offensive line. Outside of that, Dugans, Chris Thompson, Who am I thinking? I'm missing the other ones. Tony Tokaras. I think those guys on the offensive staff. I think every single Alex Atkins. I think those are the ones that you have to really evaluate. You need
Yeah.
recruiters. You need recruiters. You can go get an old college coach that isn't head coaching and put them on your analyst staff. Put them on your. You can have as many coaches as you want now. Even if you reduce those coaches off the field coaching, and they're coaching just at practices and stuff, and they're whatever, but you need recruiters. You need to go get recruiters.
Yep. Yeah, and I would say for me, I think Thompson, you can at least move to an off the field role, because I know he's like deputy head coach or something like
Yeah,
that. Mike Norvell likes him. I mean, yes, you're responsible for Landon Thomas. Now, Amari Williams came in as an edge rusher, so I don't
that's
think you
right.
really get credit for signing him there. But you bring in Landon Thomas, but you can't have a hit rate of 1 out of 10. Like you can't. And I mean, you didn't coach up Jaheim Bell. He was what he was before he got here. So yeah, I mean, I think you got to move on there. I think Axons, I would make a move there. I agree with you about David Johnson. I think he's done well. It's hard to coach guys to run behind
Correct.
a terrible offensive line. I think Tokars, I do think I would probably hang on to him for just a little bit here. And the only reason I say that is because he, again, when you look at all the busts that they had at quarterback, he was still in an analyst role where he was not allowed to coach on the field. That was Kenny
Yeah.
Dillingham.
Yeah.
Now, when you look at to where he transitioned onto the field, I believe that was 2022. And then that's when Jordan really took off. And now
That's
you're
right.
seeing, like, again, man, I don't know if Jesus himself could fix DJU as a quarterback. I just don't. I think that ship has sailed.
I believe Jesus can fix anybody.
Right. But he can save some people, but I don't know if he can fix it. I don't know if he can fix DJU. But now you look at where Brock Glenn did, right? And you're
Yeah.
like, okay, well, first off, I do want to say that, like, I don't know who's responsible for this, because how did you not? And they said that he played better than even he practiced, but how do you not see this? This looks better than what DJU has been doing. I mean, from a Saturday perspective. And then on top
Yeah.
of that, what I think is really an abomination on this coaching staff that I forgot to mention is, like, had it not have been for DJU getting hurt, we probably would have never seen Brock Glenn. And so
Oh,
to me,
man.
that is an absolute just abomination on this coaching staff. And it's been a huge misstep for them to even bring him in when you had these guys
Yeah.
on the roster as well. But the reason I would say that Tokars, I think, can live to fight another day is the fact that Brock Glenn does look good. And he did have a hand in getting Luke Kromenhawk. And you do feel good about the young guys that you have come in. Now, if these guys don't translate in the next year or two, yeah, you're going to have to make a change there. But I think Tokars might be the only other one really on the offense outside of David Johnson that I would probably keep from that perspective. Now, I will. We talked about this. We might as well lump it into the offensive talk. I do think from an offensive perspective, you're going even with the young guys. Now, I really, really want to see what you have in these young receivers from a knowing what you got going forward perspective, because we were talking about this last night on the phone. I think, you're going to have to go to the portal as much as people don't like the portal, but I don't think you need to go get 10, 12, 15 guys like you did before. That's not the recipe. But I think you're going to need 5 to 6, maybe 7 guys total, mostly in the trenches, and you're going to have to pay up. I mean, you are going to have to. And this is something I want to touch on in defense, but I'll save that for a minute. But you're going to have to go get probably at least 1 to 2 offensive linemen.
Yeah.
Pending that you get Richie Leonard back. He's still not great, but he's serviceable. I think you're going to need to get a couple of offensive linemen here. I think I'm rolling with these young tight ends. I'm good with what you got there.
Yeah.
I think you got what you need at quarterback. I think you're probably fine at running back even. The only thing I would say from the offense perspective, I'd say 1 or 2 offensive linemen, because you don't know what you got at depth. Man, I mean, I know you got Jacob Rizzi at center. I'm about ready to see him and put Maurice on the bench, but I think you could really use a day one center, and I think you could really use a who can freaking snap the ball, and then a day one offensive tackle. But we were talking about it. If you got something in these young wide receivers, and Hakeem's going to be pretty good. Also, keep in mind, you're probably going to get Destin Hill back next year. I think that has really been a very overlooked loss for this offense. That's a really speedy playmaker there. If Jalen Lucas comes back, you feel good. I don't know that you need a receiver because you still have some good ones. But, man, if you could find a Keon Coleman in the portal, I think it's a no-brainer that you take it because receivers have been so bad. So I think you need about 3 transfers, 2 on the offensive line, 1 at the receiver position, depending on what we see from those guys the rest of the year. So I'll let you give me some thoughts on where you think that goes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think you're in a range of 5 to 7. I don't think you should go over 7. I don't think you need the 30 or 40 players that I've heard projected out there in the transfer portal. No, I think you need 5 to 7 players. And I think about 3 of them, 3 to 4 of them need to come on the offensive side of the ball. I agree with you, man. If we could go find a day one starter center, that would be
Yes.
fantastic. And then a tackle, whether right or left, depending on what you got coming back and how the other young guys are playing out. And then I think, yeah, absolutely. Listen, I would love to see this wide receiver core get really more developed and invested in, especially if you are able to. Now, this is a big if you're able to hold on to your wide receiver recruiting class that you have coming in there. I don't think you need to go and try to find another wide receiver. But if a Keon Coleman type wide receiver just landed somewhere in your lap, yeah, you need to take that boy and you need to get him. And so, yeah, I think about 3 to 4 on the offensive side of the ball would be sufficient in my mind.
Yeah, it's mostly the trenches too, because I mean, again, I just want to see these guys on the field because I mean, you think about Jalen Lucas, a Camden Fryer, a Destin Hill in the slot. I like that, the sound of that. You think of Elijah Moore, LaWayne McCoy, Hakeem Williams, BJ Gibson. Like you got some receivers on this team. We're just not seeing them play. And Mike Novelli even touched on that. He's like, look, everybody wants to play, but you got to show the consistency in practice. And I'm like, Mike, have you not watched what happened at quarterback, bro? Like the veterans are not showing you the consistency in the game where it matters. So let's see, man, because the freshman tight ends have done great. So yeah, man, with that being said, we'll switch over to defense here. The defense has been bad too. I mean, but the defense has been a lot of it. It's again like a group project, man. The defense has not been great, but the defense, the numbers look bad because of what happened in the first 2 games. We can admit that they have gotten better throughout the course of the season, but they've also been put in tough situations by an offense that forget about touchdowns. We can't get first downs to keep them off the field. Downs. So, most of the struggles come late in the game where you're just gassed because they don't have the depth this year. And that's something we talked about that we were worried about, that they got some playmakers. They just don't have the depth. Now, your scoring defense is 81st in the country, giving up 25.3 points per game. Your passing defense is 77th, giving up 219 yards per game. Your rushing defense is pretty bad, 109th in the country, 182 per game there. Interceptions, you're at 103rd with only 2 on the season. But again, teams don't really have to throw on you a whole lot. Sacks, you're actually tied for 12th with 17. So that's been actually pretty decent there. Tackles for loss, 14th, tied for 14th in the country with 40 of them. Explosive plays allowed, you're tied for 123rd. So you're giving up explosives a lot, 31 so far this season. Red zone defense, you're tied for 25th. Red zone defense actually hasn't been terrible because you're actually tied for 27th in touchdown percentage at only 46.4% of red zone trips resulting in touchdowns. So that has been, it's not been great, but it's been okay. And so just to kind of go through the position groups there, and I will say one thing that is absolutely killing you this year is your turnover margin. You are 118th in turnover margin at -6. Now, typically, we've seen a lot of fluke things with this team where it's not flukes. You just can't recover fumbles and stuff like that. But typically when you have a wild swing in turnovers, that doesn't repeat itself the next year. A lot of that has to do with luck. And that's either good or bad. A lot of the teams that have like these plus whatevers, it's usually not that the next year. So you hope that can get corrected. Or it's just a luck thing sometimes, but that is killing you too. But, I think when you start up front in the trenches, I think this is another area you have to go out and you have to hit the portal hard because you have a couple of guys that you feel okay about, but we haven't really seen the young rotation like we have on some of the offensive positions with the defense here because some of your guys are still pretty good. I do think you need to make a change at that position coach too. I think it has to happen because the recruiting hasn't been good enough. You've had to rely on the portal there. But man, here is what's really interesting about this defensive line. Now, again, we talked about your rushing defense has not been good, but when you look at the pass rush has been lacking this year too, although we said they've been pretty good at sacks. But this is one thing that I find interesting. So you look at the defensive interior, it's actually not as bad as you think. So PFF has a stat called pass rush productivity, and that is a ranking based on your pressures, your quarterback hurries, and things like that, but it's heavily weighted towards sacks. And so of the defense, because obviously interior and ends are used totally differently, so I broke it down into the different groups. But your defensive interior, Josh Farmer is the 10th highest in the country in pass rush productivity from the defensive interior. That's pretty daggone good. You know, Braden Fisk last year in 2023 was 16th. Farmer was 20th last year. So again, like Josh Farmer is another he's one of those upperclassmen that he needs to be on the field because he's your best defensive tackle. He's having a heck of a season. One of the bright spots on this defensive line, I really like what you're seeing from Daniel Lyons. Last year in 2023, he was 47th. This year, he's up to 23rd in pass rush productivity. So, man, I think like that Farmer Lyons combination, which is kind of what you're seeing as you're starting to now, I like that. I think Daniel Lyons is a guy that you're going to be able to build around going forward. Darrell Jackson, not really what you wanted to see here, 74th, but Dennis Briggs was 78th last year. So that's kind of a net neutral there. Grady Kelly, I'd say, is a bust so far. Pass rush productivity, 196. So like he's just really not giving you anything there. I'm sure I forgot to look it up, but I'm sure Malcolm Ray was probably better than 196. So man, really the problem is the defensive line just hasn't been recruited well enough. And you're going to lose Josh Farmer this year. You're going to lose Darrell Jackson this year. You hope you can talk Daniel Lyons into coming back and being a full-time starter next year, but then you really got no one to go with him. And so you're going to need to bring in some guys in the portal there. But Michael, what's most interesting to me on the defensive side is that defensive end. You know, we've talked a lot about how Pat Payton was a good defensive end, freshman ACC defensive freshman of the year, rookie of the year, was pretty good last year. But how much of that was was Jared Verse? How much was that? Here's the thing. So when you go to pass rush productivity grades for your defensive ends, this year Byron Turner is actually your highest at 143rd. Marvin Jones Jr. is 167th. Sione is 235th. Pat Payton comes in this year at 210th. Now, when you look at last year, Jared Verse was 10th. 10th, top 10 defensive end in the country in pass rush.
Gosh.
And Patrick Payton was 86. So, I mean, you look at, he fell from 86 all the way down to 210th.
Gosh.
By not having Jared Verse across the line from him. So, again, man, like maybe Patrick Payton was fool's gold. I mean, again, he was the king of batted passes, but that was pretty much it. And so I do think, like, I'm still interested to see what Jaden Jones can do. I'm still interested to see what Lamont Green Jr. has. You know, you got some of these young defensive ends that I think can be good, but man, you're going to have to go get another Jared Verse. I mean, you just got Jermaine Johnson, something like that up front, because you can see where not having what that dominant defensive end, not only do you lose his production, but it makes everybody else along the defensive line not as productive too, because now they just take everybody out of the picture. And I think most teams know that your tackles are good, but your ends are terrible. And so they can just basically double team your tackles. And I mean, you could almost leave them two guys at the ends unblocked and they're not going to do anything. They're just either going to loaf or just miss the tackle. So, I mean, I would say the defensive line, to me, your defensive interior is something probably like a C. I think your defensive ends are an F, and it's been bad. And so I think this is one where and look, I will say John Papuchis, do not get rid of him. Make him your full-time special teams coordinator, because man, blocking kicks is like he just
loves it.
That is a tradition at Florida State now, blocking some kicks. So I think you find a way to keep him on the staff as special teams guy. But man, I think it is time to make a change on some defensive line coaching positions, and you're going to have to go get some help at these positions, especially defensive tackle, because you have not done good enough at recruiting there to be able to reload this. And of course, we'll get to the other positions in a minute, but man, that defensive line has just been the interior. Not bad, but because your ends are so bad, you can kind of take the only good parts you got out of the picture.
That's right. Yeah, and that's funny because I had the interior D line at a C as well too, and I had the DEs, I had the defensive ends at an F. I mean, it's just been it has been embarrassing to see this defensive line play really take a massive step back from last year. I mean, you whiffed on a Grady Kelly, and first of all, you know, Plant the Spear fans, we need to give credit to Jesse, because Jesse was saying this all off season. They didn't think Grady Kelly was any good. And I was the one that was like, well, let's give it a chance. Let's give it a chance. And you were right. I mean, he has not shown, several plays out there. You see him just getting blown up by an offensive lineman. I mean, it's just absolutely embarrassing. And with Pat Payton, it has become very evident. I'm so glad you pulled up the pass rushing productivity stat, because it's become very evident that Pat Payton wasn't the star we thought he was. His productivity last season, his ability to bat down passes, was because the offensive line had to take into account Jared Verse, had to take into account Fabian Lovett, right? Had to take into account all these others, Malcolm Ray's on the defense, that allowed him on the other side of that to wreak havoc, to be a disruptor in that. Well, when you take away those types of things, those types of players, then you really get to see what this player is. He as disruptive as we thought he was. And to go from 86, I think you said, to 210th in the country, I mean, that is a devastatingly drop. Now let's just say this. No matter what level of football you're at, high school, pee-wee, college, or pro, you need both sides of the line to work to effectively be able to do. You can have an Aaron Donald, but if you don't have a Vontae Miller on the other side of that line, Aaron Donald gets obsolete because he's got three guys that are blocking him, right? Aiden Hutchinson from the Detroit Lions. He also needs other guys on that line to help him be the superstar he is. So I'm not saying that Pat Payton is a terrible player. I'm just saying what is now being exposed is the fact that without those other types of players with him, he is ineffective on this line. His ability to do what he does best, which is to block down passes, bat down passes, be disruptive on the offensive line. Well, on the other side of that, Marvin Jones Jr., who we thought, man, this kid is going to be something. Look at the size. Look at him. He has been MIA. Every time they show him on the screen, I'm like, oh, that boy's still on the team? Like,
right.
He's been MIA. Yeah. He has not been the player we thought he was, which is, again, makes you wonder, did Georgia see the same thing? Yeah. Did they get him in and they thought, you know what? Yeah, we'll let him go scot-free because he is not the player we thought he was. I mean, this DE position has been disappointment is an understatement. I agree with you that I think Daniel Lyons has been good. I think the other player you mentioned, the other D tackle player. I think the D tackle has been really good. Obviously, Josh Former has been dominant at as much as he possibly can. Daryl Jackson has really been a letdown in a lot of sense. I mean, remember last year they were talking about how they had to basically stop practice and ask him not to play because he was disrupting stuff. Where's that guy at? Like, we've rarely seen that in the games at all. So to me, the D linemen, the defensive tackles, they've been a C. The Ds have been an F. Again, this is where if you're looking at that 5 to 7 range, man, I think you have to go get some day one starters on that defensive tackle because you've not recruited very well. You've already seen we've had some decommitments in that area as well too. And then also, listen, we have to replace the coaching staff in this area. I think you move John Papucha to your full-time special teams coordinator. I think you have to, ask Odell to take an off the field role, ambassador role, whatever it is. I mean, you want to honor him well. He is Florida State, so you want to really honor him well. But yeah, it's time. We are not recruiting well. We're not developing well. There seems to be some lethargic in that recruiting sense from that coaching staff. And I think it's just time. I think you have to replace them. And I think you have to use at least two of those 5 to 7 transfer portal spots for defensive line starters.
Easy. Maybe even more than that. I mean, because really, like I said, who are you going to bring in? Because you got nobody and you're not playing anybody. So you don't even have, it's not even like a tight end where you're like, okay, well, I think we know what we got there. We're good.
Right.
Defensive line, Daniel Lyons. That's it. I mean, granted, I think you have to look at it in two ways here is like one, outside of Josh Farmer, all of these guys that had high hopes to go to the NFL, who's going to take a Pat Payton? Who is going to take a Marvin Jones Jr. after this year? So those guys can probably come back if you want them. But I'm in a position right now where they squeezed you for money last year. A lot of those guys did. And they say there's rumors that that's a $2 million defensive line. Well, look, man, I think you need to let that check bounce this year. Like if they're going to listen, we need to go to like a productivity based NIL. And like, if you are not good on the field, I'm sorry, guys, you got to take a pay cut. And if you don't like it, don't flirt with the portal. Get married to that thing because you're out of here. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to hear it. You got to let them walk. And really, what's disappointing with that, as you look at like a guy like Kyle Kennard, a guy that came from Georgia Tech, visited campus, and then you didn't want to pay up for him, so you let him go to South Carolina. Right now, he's got 3 sacks and 8.5 tackles for loss, leads the team in tackles for loss. Marvin Jones Jr., who you chose probably over him, has 3 sacks and 3.5 tackles for loss. So again, like, you got to do better at your evals. You got to be willing to pay up for defensive linemen. But yeah, I mean, you're going to really need some help on that defensive line going into next year, because you saw how good a dominant defensive line made this defense, and you see now how much it hurts you to not have it. Now, when you go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, and the thing is, it's not that we're asking for this defensive line to be like sack, man, but disrupt the passer, get him off his launch spot, make it hard for the running back to get more than 2 or 3 yards, have more tackles in the backfield. You know what I mean? Like, be disruptive. And that's the thing. You automatically know if a team's going to run the ball, they automatically get 4 yards down the field with their offensive line against our defensive line before that quarterback or that running back ever gets touched. That's a problem.
Yeah, and I agree. And that's why I want to kind of see because again, you're going to lose Farmer after this year. So I want to see what you got in some of these guys. KJ Sampson is really the only other defensive tackle that like I can think of that's on the freaking roster. So like, because you've recruited so poorly at defensive tackle, you are going to need probably 2 of them out of the portal. If that's pending that you get KJ Sampson and Daniel Lyons to stay. But I'd like to start seeing what some of these defensive ends got. Byron Turner, I think he can probably come back. But then you got
Aaron
Jaden Jones.
What's up with Aaron Hester?
Right. Like, I need to start seeing some of these young guys get some burn because I know you're trying to win some games too, but like, you need to see what you got for next year, because like we said, this is your rookie camp. Now looking back at the linebackers, I got to give them credit, man. They've gotten better throughout the season. They were terrible to begin with. Now, I know DJ Lundy did not play against Clemson. He won't be here next year. So I actually like what I see from some of the younger linebackers. Like, I think you have something in Juice Cryer. I think you have something in Blake Nicholson. I think he's getting a lot of valuable experience this year. The recruiting hasn't been good. We all know that. That's no secret. So obviously, I think everybody and their mama hopes that Randy Shannon gets fired. So I would say that you probably need another Tatum Bethune in the portal after this year. You need a productive college linebacker. It doesn't have to be, the Butkus Award winner. You just need a productive college linebacker to go along with Blake Nicholson and Juice Cryer for next year. Even Omar Graham Jr. has gotten a little bit better. I mean, I ain't trying to build my defense off of that, but he's gotten better. Cam Riley won't be here next year, but he's gotten better too. So I think your linebackers have gotten better. I would say in the first couple of games, they got an F-, but I think in the last 3 to 4 weeks, in the last 3 to 4 games, I think you could probably put them at a fair C-, right? They've gotten a little bit better. They're still not great, but man, they have played significantly better than they did at the start of the season. So I think for the 2024 perspective, I think your linebackers have gotten better, but I like that you're playing Blake Nicholson. I like that you're playing Juice Cryer now, because you're building for the future. That is a position that you are seeing some young guys make an impact. But yeah, man, I mean, it's definitely going to be actually breaking news right here on the show. I just got an ESPN notification. DJ Lundy is out the rest of the season. So happens right as we're recording right now. So again, DJ Lundy, good timing. Thanks, ESPN.
Thanks, ESPN.
So yeah, I mean, it sucks because he was, your leader on defense, but at the same time, like at this point, with how bad you are from a team perspective, I think it gives other guys opportunities. And so, man, I mean, I don't know if that's going to qualify him for a red shirt or not. I don't know, because he didn't play in the last game, so it's only been 4 games. I think that he's played in maybe 5, but I like what you see from some of your young guys, but I mean, they've gotten better, but I still give this linebacker group a below average grade.
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing about the linebacker group. It's been a hot garbage for a while. I mean, for the longest time. I mean, even towards the end of the Jimbo era, I mean, it's just been a group that we've just not been able to figure out. And I will say I've tried to make excuses for it. Listen, the way college football era of defenses are going right now, you don't need I mean, especially when you're playing like a 4-2-5 defense, you don't need like a superstar defense linebackers, but you do need competent linebackers. And we've not had competent linebackers this season. Outside of Blake Nicholson, I think he's been competent. I think Juice Cryer has been a little bit competent, and I think who am I missing? Cam Riley's been okay. We haven't heard a lot from Sean Murphy. Did I forget? Is he injured or
I think he moved back to Alabama or something.
Yeah, I think he moved back to Alabama. I mean, it just hasn't been good. It hasn't been good for a while. Like you said, I think everybody's ready for Randy Shannon to be let go. To find a linebacker coach that can recruit and that can develop. One of the things we did say about Randy Shannon was, while he couldn't recruit, he did develop. But then you look at Tatum Bethune and Kalen DeLoach, and you're like, well, they were already what they were. And they were just competent enough to keep to make that defense well. And I think actually, as we get to the secondary, I know we'll get that in a second, I really think a lot of the grades that we give the secondary is in response to what we've seen from the linebacker play, because the linebacker play has not been great. Now, like you said, in the first couple games, I was F- all the way to the as far. I'm actually going to go with a D. And the reason I'm going with a D is because I have seen Blake Nicholson get better. I have seen Cam Riley and Juice Cryer actually begin to fill the holes they're supposed to. They're not overrunning plays. They're scraping, as they talk about. They're scraping a little bit better. But yet again, I still see them in wrong spaces. I still see them not making the tackles when they're supposed to. I still see them getting hit at the point of contact and being dragged. Like, that's just not what you want to see in your linebackers. And so I give them a D. But when we get to the secondary, what I gave the linebackers is going to factor into what I give the secondary.
Yeah. And like I said, I almost grade them in two different sections. Like the first two games were just god awful. But I think they have gotten better. They have shown progress. And the best part is a lot of it has been your younger guys that have been stepping up. So, but like you said, man, going back to the secondary, to me, it's actually been a disappointment. I mean, really, it has. I thought the secondary was going to be the strength of this team, regardless of how everything panned out. I think Azarie has been good, but not great. I think you expected more out of him this year. I think Fentrell Cypress has regressed. He doesn't look like he's really wanting to hit people like you would think. I think from the nickel position, I think Kevin Knowles has been pretty good. He's probably been better than people expect, but not great by any means there. Obviously, Earl Little Jr. has been just abysmal, which, he's moving back to safety, but he's a young guy. He's got some time. But, man, I think one of the places that I'm most disappointed has really been safety. Like, I think Shaheem has been hit or miss this year. He's been inconsistent. Like, he's been good at times. He's been bad at times. My guy is letting me down. Conrad Hussey is bad. Man. He sucks. Just so many stupid plays, like unwillingness to tackle. I mean, again, like, you want to sum up Florida State's secondary. Look at that Clemson play, man, where like you could have turned that into a pick, or like
that was a clear pick.
A sandwich tackle or something like that, into like we took each other out and also at somehow propelled the Clemson receiver in for a touchdown. It's just been not good. And with the secondary, I will say this too, is that you also have to grade the secondary knowing that Memphis and Clemson are really the only two drop back passing teams that you've had to face. Everybody else has been mostly just kind of running through you. So like they haven't really had to throw the ball a whole lot. And so you haven't really faced it. Like, man, I hate to say it, but like Cam Ward's probably going to put up 350 passing yards on you easily. The secondary has been a big disappointment, but I do think some of the encouragement there as we look forward, because the way we're kind of doing this is like what you're seeing now, what you're seeing going forward. Right. I do think with guys like Quindarius Jones, I do think where you see guys like, Edwin Joseph and some of these guys where like KJ Kirkland's got some burn. They're making rookie mistakes. Like, they're out of position on some certain things. They got to get technique things cleaned up, but they've been as good as your veterans. So like you see where those guys can be serviceable going forward. But I say, man, this secondary has kind of been a letdown now. I'd probably give them about a C. But that's also knowing that you haven't faced a lot of tough passing offenses either. Like let's revisit this after you face a couple of different teams, but it's been a disappointment. I will say the secondary has too. just especially at the safety position. That's where I've been the most disappointed. But you do have some young guys. That
That's
is
right.
like the one position where they're really starting to play young guys on this defense, and other than the linebackers, which I mean, those were kind of the best guys you had anyway. So
Right.
I do like some of the pieces you have moving forward. And again, we really haven't even seen Charles Lester yet. We haven't seen a
That's
lot of
right.
Kai Bates yet. So I still feel good about those guys going forward. From a personnel standpoint, I think Patrick Surtain is one of the guys you want to circle on that coaching staff that you want to keep from a perspective of recruiting. Right now, man, I will say like the development is a little bit in question because you look at some of the guys like Renardo and Jerrion and all those guys last year. A lot of those guys kind of were what they were. I mean, maybe you improved a little bit. They did make improvements. They got better, especially Jerrion. But
Right.
at the same time, again, it's that group project mentality where like you grade them based off what you're getting from a defensive line that sucks at pass rush, what you're getting from linebackers that create mismatches too. So that does hurt the secondary's grade overall, but I do like some of the young pieces that you're seeing there.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, they're 77th in the country, giving up 219 yards a game, giving up 12.78 yards per catch. It's interesting because you saw what they did last year and you thought, okay, they were 11th I went back to look at my notes. They were 11th in the country in passing defense. They were 4th in the country in 2022. And now they're 77th in the country.
Yeah.
And the outside of Akeem Dent, that's not there, and Akeem Dent, Ricardo Green, Jerrion Jones, those three. Like, we went from
Fentrell was there, Shaheem
Cantrell
was
was there,
there, AZ
Shaheem was
was
there,
there. Yep.
AZ was there. Like, we literally fell 66 spots in 1 year. Did those three players make that significant of a difference in that secondary? Now,
And
again,
you
go
really
ahead.
didn't really face many good passing offenses the last 2
Last
years
year.
either. Like
Exactly.
you really didn't either. So I think that really kind of fool's golded some of those stats too.
True. Very true. Very true. So going to this year, the reason why I was saying earlier that my linebacker grade plays into my secondary grade is because a lot of the stuff that the secondary has had to take on is what the linebacker should have had to take on.
Yeah.
Like you having linebackers having to come down and fill gaps. I'm sorry, you having secondary having to come down and fill gaps. You're having the safeties having to drive down into linebacker spaces because the linebackers are out of play. They're out of gap. They've been scraped off by the offensive line. They're way out of gaps. And so that's why I think some of this has been on that the secondary hasn't looked as good is because they're basically having to play both secondary and linebacker in some instances. And that's just not been a good thing. So for me, I've given the secondary a C. I think there have been times that AZ has been dominant, and there have been times that it seems like he's been not there. I think Fentrell Cyphus has taken a step back. I think Conrad Hussey unfortunately has not been the answer that we thought he could be.
Yeah.
I think the Miami player Devontae Brown has not been the answer at safety. Yes,
Amarion Cooper should have brought him back.
I don't know, man.
Should have left him in Colorado. 37.5 PFF grade. Yeah, should have left that in Colorado.
Just not been good. And then Shaheem has been just like you said, hot or cold. He's on one, he's off one. He's on one, he's off seven. It's just and how much of this is Patrick Surtain's fault? I mean, listen, at the end of the day, it comes back to the coaches, right? For sure. But Patrick has proven he can develop guys. He can recruit guys. He's probably the one person on the defensive side of the ball that's safe from being fired. In my mind, at least, don't fire him. I think he's been really good.
Yeah.
But there has been a little bit of regression as we've seen across the board with this secondary. So to me, I give them a C. And I'm curious to see how they finish out the rest of the year. Early on in games, they're in it. They're there. But then as the game goes on, as the offense fails to score, I mean, it kind of that momentum kind of flows throughout. And especially in the secondary where you got to be a dog every single play. Man, when your offense is not scoring, when there is no hope, when your defensive line is not getting penetration, when your safeties are having to go down and you're being left on island after island after island after island after island because you don't have safety help because your safeties are having to play linebacker. Yeah, I can understand how that can cause you to be like, I'm gonna take off this play. I'm gonna take off that play.
Yeah. Yeah. And I will say, I do think a lot of their struggles has to do with a lack of pass rush, too. I mean,
Yeah,
last year, again, you just didn't have time to sit back there and pick the defense apart because Jared Verse
that's
was
right.
coming for you,
That's
and
right.
he might just hit you with an offensive lineman. So, that was,
That's right.
so you
That's
just don't
right.
have that this year. You just don't. We just talked about the numbers there. But again, like we said, I mean, KJ Kirkland's up to 214 snaps at safety this year. So, you like what you're seeing there. Edwin Joseph is at 78 snaps. So you're starting to get these guys some burn. As far as the younger guys getting some experience there. And then at corner, I mean, you're getting Jabril Rawls has a few snaps there. Quindarius Jones is up to 85 snaps. Now, one thing I did see looking down the depth chart, I actually forgot about this guy. One thing that I want to talk about with the defensive line that I think you could really use right now, and I don't know if this is an injury problem or what, but is Durajaye. Like, he's played
Oh yeah.
5 snaps this entire season. So it has to
Wow.
be an injury problem because I
Yeah.
think right now with how poor you are at defensive end that he could only make a difference in a positive manner. So maybe that's someone you can build off of coming back next year because he was
Completely
a
forgot about
really,
that.
yeah, I totally forgot he was even on the team because he hasn't played all year. So that's something that you can hope maybe going into next year that you got some guys that can be one other guy that you can build around of. Maybe he has to even slide into defensive tackle. But to close this episode out, Michael, now that we've kind of talked about where we're at, let's talk about what you can do with the rest of the season. Because like we
Yeah.
said, you talk about how this has to be kind of like your rookie camp going forward because the
Yeah.
season is a wash. Like you're not going to make anything of significance. You're probably not even going to make, the Tax Slayer Bowl or the Toilet Bowl or anything like that. You're just not. It
The
is what it
Sun
is, man.
Bowl.
Right. You're not going to make any of that. You're not going to make the Fruit Loops, the Corn Flakes, the the Smacks, the Lucky Charms. You're not making none of them bowls. So not even the Raisin Bran Bowl that no
Not
one
even
even
a Raisin
likes.
Bran.
Uh, so like I think you
That's
have to
funny. I had
start.
a bowl of Raisin Bran last night.
You look at you. You're getting old, man. You're getting old. I still like the Lucky Charms. So
Yeah.
drop your favorite cereal in the comments if you're watching on YouTube. But yeah, man, I do think like going forward, you want to look for that 2021 type of progress late in the season.
Yeah.
You want to start to see what you got out of some young guys. You want to try and win some of these games. And I do think, as bad as Florida State has looked, you have some winnable games with the mindset of, I think Brock Glenn does give this offense a spark. You have a bye week here to kind of let some guys earn an opportunity. You have another week for him to work as the starter, getting the QB1 reps to get on the same page as some of these guys. I think that is going to make a difference.
Yeah.
I think you are starting to see some of the younger guys on defense that it's really just an alignment and assignment thing that they got to get cleaned up. But so I think you really have to continue to work these guys in. Now, I think you want to try and win some games because that will help you recruiting. That will help with a lot of these things. So you're going to have to play guys like Josh Farmer, but they've earned it like we talked about.
Yeah.
But, when you look at the schedule going forward, and we won't dive into each team, but like when you look at these games going forward, the reason I say that you have some winnable games, like first off, you get a bye week, then you go into the Duke game. Now, Duke is 5-1, just took their first loss to Georgia Tech last week. But to me, that record is fool's gold. They won over Elon, which is a 1-4 FCS team, 26-3 in week 1. Then they beat Northwestern 26-20 at Northwestern. Northwestern's getting like a new stadium. So there's like literally 15 fans at a soccer field. They beat them in double overtime. Northwestern is 2-3 with no Power 5 wins. UConn, they beat the next week 26-21. They're 4-2, no Power 5 wins, and lost 50-7 against Maryland. Then they beat UNC. That's probably their best win on the season, 21-20. But UNC is 3-3, and they haven't beaten a Power 4 team since week 1 versus Minnesota when they had the Johnson kid at quarterback. So, they've struggled there. And my goodness, if you can't
remember
put up
UNC being up 20-0 in that game.
Right. And they won 20-19. So, they held on. Now, they got Amarion Hampton, who's a good running back. That makes you a little nervous. But, James Madison put up 70 points on them, 53 in the first half. If Florida State's offense doesn't score 20 points on UNC, fire everybody is what I say. But, I think really and then, again, they lost to Georgia Tech 24-14. So, to me, that's a little bit of a fool's gold record there at 5-1. I think you can go on the road and you can get a win against Duke coming off a bye week. that can really kind of give you some momentum. Unfortunately, on the other side of that, you got to go down to Moral Gables and play Miami. But man, I mean, it's going to be you against Miami and the ACC, because you already know that's coming, because the ACC has bailed them out 2 weeks in a row.
Yeah.
And Miami's 6-0, right? They were down 35-10 against Cal. They found a way to come back. But again, who is this Miami team? I joke, I give them full credit, but I have joked this whole time about they're getting fat off cupcakes.
Yeah.
Look what happened when they played anybody with a pulse. Virginia Tech's not even good. They technically lost that game, and then the ACC refs reversed the loss,
bailed them out,
and made it a win. And then if they call the most targeting of all targeting calls that I've ever seen against Cal, that game's over too. I mean, you literally had against Florida, where the guy hit the guy in the butt, and it was called targeting. And then you hit him in the head, and it's not. So again, they've been bailed out 2 weeks in a row against one team that's not great and one team that you already beat. So, I'm not saying you're going to go down and beat Miami, but I'm saying if you use this bye week to get right, you had another bye week you didn't get right with. But if you use this bye week to get right, and it's kind of sad that we're still teaching the fundamentals of football, blocking, tackling, and catching in week 7, but you beat Duke, I think maybe you carry some momentum. I think the team will get up for that game like they did for Clemson, because it's obviously a big rivalry game, way bigger than the Clemson rivalry is. I don't think you're going to get blown out in that game like I did before. I don't think you're going to win, but, it is what it is. But you never know. Then I think you can beat UNC. I think Notre Dame's going to be tough on the road because they got a really good defense. But then you get a bye week, and you get Charleston Southern, who's a 1-4 FCS team. And then you get Florida. And while Florida is 3-2, they've not really played a tough schedule. And so, I mean, Mississippi State, UCF, and Samford are their wins. That's not really anything impressive. They're about to hit that meat part of their schedule that we talked about, where they're probably going to lose 5 to 6 of the next 7 games easily. And so I really do think you can beat a Duke, you can beat a UNC, you can beat a Charleston Southern, you can go 4-2 in these last 6 games and get you some momentum going forward. And who knows, maybe you even pull an upset, if you get overlooked by a Notre Dame, or if Miami has another kind of bad game like we've seen. So, I mean, because they still got to play Louisville before you come to town, I believe. So, yeah, man, I think you really do with Brock Glenn at quarterback. Now, if you had DJ, I'd say you're probably 1-5 in these last games. And I hate to say that, but I do think if you can at least clean some things up with the young tight ends, with Brock Glenn, and if you can keep this defense engaged and not quit and play hard, because when they play hard, they're not terrible.
Yeah.
Man, and now this is couching the fact that you're going to have to score 20 points in a game. It's just got to happen. You're not going to win crap if you keep scoring 14 points a game. But again, we talked about the points you left on the field and things like that. We talked about how you only faced 2 top 50 rush defenses in the last 6 games, where you had 5 out of 6 in the first 6 games. So, if you can run the ball a little bit better, Brock Glenn can continue to progress. I think you can go 4-2 in these last 6. Now, that might be a little rosy there, maybe a little bit. Maybe that's my fan glasses going on. But at worst, I really do think you should finish the season 3-3. And while 4-8, 5-7 is not necessarily what you want, I mean, it's better than 1-11 or 2-10 for sure. But man, if you go on the road and you lose to Duke, I mean, then I think you're cooked for the rest of the season. But again, you take that bye week, you work on yourself, you go up there. If you get a win against Duke, I think you can roll that momentum with Brock at quarterback if he continues to play well to a 4-2 finish.
Yeah. I mean, again, I want to be where you are. I wish I could get there. But the problem is I have not seen this team, this offense, put up more than 16 points since the Georgia Tech game.
Yeah.
Where they should have put up more than 16 points against. They should have put up 40 points against that Memphis defense.
Yeah.
They should have put up a ton of points against that Boston College defense. They should have put up a ton of points against that Georgia Tech defense. They should have put up at least 23 points against Clemson, right? They should have put up more points against Cal. I mean, look what Cal gave up. What was it?
Let's 38. See, I think 38 to Miami.
Yeah, 38 to Miami, but 28 points in the final 4th quarter. And so it's hard for me to say, yes, they could go 4-2 down the stretch. Could they go 3-3? I don't know, because I have not seen this offense put up points. again, with Brock, yes, it was against Clemson, but with Brock, they only put up 13 points again. And so until I see that, it's hard for me to say that I think they can go 3-3 or 4-2. I'd love it. It'd be great if they go 4-2 down the stretch. Doesn't mean they get into a bowl game, but at least it shows some progress. Honestly, right now, the only game that I think is even win a bowl is the Charleston Southern game, because we got to go to Duke. And I know we've never lost to Duke, knock on wood. We've never lost to Duke, but gosh, Duke put up 20 points against UNC, a terrible offense, right? James Madison put up 70 on USC. Yeah. But the fact is, we can't score right now. So until I see that happening, until I see that Duke game, find me after the Duke game. Maybe I'll feel differently. But until I see that Duke game, I just can't project more than one win right now for the rest of the season. I mean, another win.
Now, I will say, when I say could go 4-2 or 3-3, that is very much a could.
Yes.
But I do think, and like I said, my hope is that with another bye week and with them seeing that Brock Glenn is good enough, right? Yep. I think that told Mike Norvell, and I would hope he knew this anyway, but I think that tells Mike Norvell that, like, look, DJU is not coming back the rest of the season. He is not going to touch the field for you again. We need to build an offense based on what Brock Glenn can do. And Alex Atkins did say that they didn't put a ton on his plate in this game.
That's right.
Against Clemson, because they didn't want him to overthink things. They just wanted him to go out and play free. And again, if you catch the ball, you actually make some points. In the Boston College game, you didn't score a lot, but DJU missed a wide open touchdown, 3 throws in a row. So, like, there was 20 points there. You just didn't make the plays. Now, I understand not making the plays does not equal points. I get that. I'm not a mathematician, but I understand that, like, close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades. But again, like, I think you have to find a way to score. But I think you have something in the young tight ends that are going to keep getting better. You have something in Brock Glenn. And if you can just find a way to catch the daggone football and find a way to get creative in the run game and score 20 points in at least a couple of these games, I do think the possibility, let me word it that way, the possibility to go 3-3, 4-2 is there. And while that's not what you want, man, it feels better than losing. That is for sure.
Yeah. And I'll agree with you on that.
But I could see 1-5. I mean, it's on the table.
I agree that with Brock, I do have more hope that they can score more points. Yeah. I just right now, I can't let myself get too hopeful, because then I'll just be even more mad if it doesn't happen. So I'm couching my, like, hopefulness with Brock. I thought, okay, I could see us finally getting to a place where we can score. I just need to see it so that I can feel confident that it can happen.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, like I said, he's making the throws. It's just guys got to freaking catch the ball. Whereas, like, there's guys doing jumping jacks in the back of the end zone and DJU hits a cheerleader, or someone in the press box. Like, it's there to be made. You just got to make the plays. And so, I mean, we'll see, man. I think that would at least give you some confidence. I like that when you look at going forward, as bad as the season is, the guys who are making plays for you are the young guys. I think that is what you have to really hitch your wagon to, that you see guys. There's a lot of guys that shouldn't touch the field anymore this season. But there's a lot of guys that you can see a core group of hashtag Freedom Youngins that you can build around, right?
That's right.
Again, like we talked about, to round this episode out, you're going to need to go to the portal to get those guys some help, because the most critical areas that you're not seeing that young progression is on the defensive line and the offensive line, where you need it the most. Daniel Lyons is good. Jalen Early's serviceable. He's getting better. Andre Otto's getting some experience. Other than that, that's really it. And so maybe George Aye comes back next year. But you see the secondary, you see the linebackers, you see Hakeem Williams again, a receiver.
That's right.
You know that you might get a Jalen Lucas and a Destin Hill back next year. But you see a core group of guys that you're able to build on going forward. And so I think that is important. And like we talked about with the Clemson game, watch the game within the game. Whether or not you do go 4-2 or 2-4 in these last few games, just look for that continuous progress, because that's how you're going to get better next year. But I mean, you're going to need to make a lot of changes. You're going to need to get a lot of help in here at the end of the season. And so, as we close out the midseason review, I mean, the grades are all bad. There are no there are no good grades for this team outside of your kicker and your punter. And apparently Mike Norvell is got like Fitzgerald doing homeschool right now because he doesn't let him do many class projects. Just get some points, man. Let him kick. His leg's probably getting rusty, but outside of that, I think that's really, and I would even say, man, like if you wanted to throw it on there, I would give coaching like a D- right now. I mean, I know the only reason I don't give them an F is because like there's only so much you can do with not a whole lot. But if you want to throw in that them not recruiting guys or not evaluating well enough is making the mistake with Brock Glenn, like that could drag him down to an F2. But yeah, man, I mean, it's just you gotta keep finding young guys that you can build around going forward, and they've done a pretty good job of that the last couple of weeks. I think you just need to start expanding that every week. This is a young guy that we can use. This is a young guy that we can use. How are you going to do in this game situation? And that's what you buoy your hope for going forward to get this thing fixed. Because again, next year probably isn't going to be the year you want either.
Right.
But it doesn't have to be this.
It doesn't have to be this bad.
And because at least in a terrible kind of way, the best thing is your worst players are your oldest guys. And so your best players have been your youngest guys. So this year's a wash. That makes next year feel better.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah, I think so. I think what you're trying to do is you're trying to get into next year and you're trying to raise the floor. Because right now the floor is a 1-11 team. Like, if we're being honest, it's a 1-11 team. Charleston Southern, you can go 2-10 maybe. But that's the floor right now. So what you're trying to do is to get that floor back to where it's supposed to be, which is like no worse than an 8-4 season. Yeah. And so if you can develop these young guys, recruit some really some really good high school guys coming in, and then supplement, keyword, supplement that good young crop of youngins with a couple key transfer portal players that help you go from a 7-5, a 6-6 to that 8-4, 9-3 area. That's what you want to do. And then you've got to go get some good recruiting coaches. Not good, elite, great to elite recruiting coaches. You've got to go make those changes. I think if you do those things, then you're looking at least a better season where you're going to be respectable. You might be in the conversation for an ACC championship, which then puts you in the conversation for a potential berth to the invitational. But you've got to figure out, how do you supplement the young growth of these youngins with a couple key transfer portal players, and you got to go get some better recruiters.
Right. And that's what we've said all along is your hope throughout the season is that the young guys were talented. And now we've actually seen it translate on the field where they've been good. So that's going to do it for us today, guys. I agree. You got to go get you some recruiters. I hear there's a guy that's been hanging around Tallahassee that they ain't really got a whole lot going on right now. He can be found at your local
Is he the guy that says is he the guy that says the play don't make the helmet don't make the player makes the helmet? Is that the guy?
Hey, bring him in, but make him sign a promise note that he ain't going to quit on us this time. So we'll see, man. But you got to go get some dogs from the portal and from the recruiting trail, and you got to get some dogs on your coaching staff.
That's right.
So, we'll see, man. But that's going to do it for this episode, guys. We appreciate you tuning in. We wanted to bring you something for the bye week, even though Florida State doesn't have a game this Saturday. We thought it'd be a good time to kind of go big picture, and talk about everything from where this team stands halfway through the season. Hopefully, they can actually work on some things and get some momentum late in the season. That would be great. A 4-2 finish, man. Again, like it's not going to be where you want to be, but man, it would feel a lot better than 1-5. Let's just say that much. Yep. So next game, obviously, you guys know, is Duke on Friday night. I'm still on the fence. I may actually be up there. So if you guys are planning on going to that game, let me know in the comments. If you're watching on YouTube, I probably will be there. So make sure you stop and say hi. But yeah, man, that's going to do it for us. You guys, if you're in Florida, by the time you're watching this, please be safe with this hurricane. Michael did not blow away during this episode, so batten down the hatches, and we'll catch you on the next one. So we appreciate you guys. Make sure you check out Alumni Hall, our title sponsor, as well as drop a like and subscribe if you enjoyed this content. And if you're on the podcast, rate and review, tell a friend, tell a neighbor. It helps us reach some more people. So definitely, like we said, man, our thoughts and prayers are with everybody in Florida as the storm approaches. And, we've already been through enough watching football with Florida State, so we don't need any more trouble. So appreciate you guys. As always, thanks for tuning in, and go Noles.
Go Noles.